You want to be able to take full control of who can do what to which content in your Picturepark? How you configure that in Picturepark is exactly what this video is about. Before going into Picturepark, we recommend using our permission model matrix template to map out the access control and give yourself a good overview. Ask your Picturepark contact person for the template. In that template, the first sheet tackles the roles. In column A, user roles, you want to create a list of all the groups of users for which there are differences in what they can do. The template already includes 5 examples. Administrators, the editor with managed permissions that can upload, edit and apply certain permissions to content. The editor who can upload and edit but not apply permissions. An employee who can view and download, and an external who can also view and download but should not get access to certain internal content. These are just examples. Please add here all the user roles you think are needed for your organizations. You might want to look in other content management systems in use or Picturepark 8 if you are migrating to the new Picturepark. You'll see 20 plus user rights options to choose from. And this probably looks a bit overwhelming. I'll guide you through the most important ones, using the example user roles in the template. If a user role only needs view and download access and nothing more, you don't need to apply any user rights, like in the example for external. If you want users to be able to create sharings and collections, you add the manage sharings and manage collections user rights. In this example, the case for employees. Then we come to the more complex user roles that have uploading and editing rights. To be able to upload content and edit metadata, you need at least the user rights manage content and manage transfer. Add the user right manage list items if you want this user role to be able to add new list items, for instance new keywords. This is how the editor edit content user role is set up. If you want your editors to be able to assign permissions, you need to add manage permissions user rights. It's good to know that when you upload content, the permission will be set to private, and only you or super administrators can access it. Often a permission is added automatically. Check with your Picturepark content person how to do this. But if there is no automation in place, your editors will need this permission to add a permission set. Another example is when you allow editors to upload content and work on it under the permission 1 to check. And when finished, allow them to make it public, changing the permission to public. Later on, you will learn how to fine-tune this, so you can, for instance, not allow your editors to archive content. The most user rights are given to the administrator user role. But even here, we don't recommend to give all rights, as some are more technical in nature. You can see the recommendation in the template. Your Picturepark contact person will advise you if other user rights are needed in your situation. You can also read the user roles explained in our manual if you want to completely understand each user right. So, I hope that makes the options in the role sheet in your template clear. Now it's up to you to add all the user roles and user rights you think you'll need. Then it's time to look at the second sheet in the template permissions. This is a matrix, crossing the user roles vertically with the content permission sets horizontally. In other words, will you here define what a particular user role is allowed to do to content with a particular permission. You start with looking at your content permission sets. In the template, we have already created 4 that are used in most cases, representing a typical content lifecycle. The question to ask yourself, to which groups of content do I want to limit access to? Is there confidential content? Content only relevant for some user groups? Content that is not yet ready to be published? Or content that has reached its end of life? For each of these cases, you want a separate permission. But you also don't want too many permissions because you'll need to manage them, and it should be easy for editors to understand and work with. Once your permissions have been defined, you can go through them user role by user role to define access with these options. Blank, the user role will have no access to content with these permission sets. View, allowing the user role to view and download except the original file. Access original gives access to the original file. View and access original combines the two previous. Edit metadata gives right to add and edit metadata. Edit content additional to adding metadata. Does this allow also the user role to replace the original content item? Manage permissions allows the user role to assign a permission to content, and delete explains itself. Except for the view and access original are these role permissions additive, meaning that the permission lower in the list includes all the permissions higher. So the permission delete also allows you to manage permissions, edit content, etc. Next to the content permissions, you also need to decide on the different schema permissions. In most cases, these schemas are limited to layers and lists. And here you start with looking at which schema permissions you need. The question to ask yourself is, do I want to limit access to certain layers or lists? Should there be differences between user roles in terms of adding, updating and deleting list items? In the template you'll find two permissions already filled in that are a good starting point. One for the administrator user role, which will be applied to all schemas in use, and mostly lists and layers. And one for editors to give editors manage item permissions on particular schemas they need access to when they add or update metadata. It's good to know that the schema permissions for all layers is set by default on view for all. So in most cases you don't need to create a separate schema permission set for user roles aimed at viewing and downloading content. The options to choose from are view, which is by default set to view for all on all schemas, manage items, allowing a user role with edit metadata content permissions or above to edit, manage schema, allowing administrators to manage the settings. You can see in the template how we have worked out the matrix for those two proposed schema permission sets. See also the link to our manual where you read more in depth about content and schema permissions. And you can check the permission cheat sheet. Great. Now that we got the template completed, it's time to implement it in Picturepark. We start with roles. You add a new one and copy the naming from your template and add the needed user rights. This is very straightforward. Then we go to permissions. Add a new one and also here copy the naming from your template. When you scroll down to role permissions, you can add the different permissions by user role as you have defined in your template. You'll see that there is another setting to configure, permission set permissions, on which we haven't talked yet. This setting is only relevant for user roles that have a managed permission or above as content permissions, or user roles that can add content permissions to content, in other words. These user roles need to be added here with one of these two options. Apply for editor user roles, manage for administration user roles that can change the settings. Then it's time to configure the schema permission sets, which you can access here. Add a new one and copy the naming from your template. And add by user role the right access permission, following the input from your template. The last point is to add the permission set permission. In most cases, only the administrator user roles should be added here with manage. This permission is usually set up at the beginning and then hardly ever changed. So it is very unusual that other user roles need to be allowed to apply a schema permission. Now that we created these schema permissions, we also need to assign them to each schema, concretely to each layer and list. In our example here, we only have one layer, basic information. When I go to the permissions, I can see that the view for all is set by default. That means that I don't need to do anything for user roles that don't have edit permissions. So I assign the two created schema permissions, one for administrators, one for editors. This action will effectively give all user roles that are linked to these schema permissions the rights to edit fields in this layer. The next step is going through my list. I start with the keyword list. Go to permissions and also here add both schema permissions, making it possible for administrators and editors to add new keywords to this list. You should do the same for all lists if applicable. It happens frequently that permissions are shown at the bottom of thumbnails in the content browsers. It's called the display pattern. When you add a new permission, this display pattern will not be updated automatically. It has to be configured. The easiest way to organize this is to write an email to support@picturepark.com and ask to update the display pattern with the new permissions you created. That actually brings us to the end of this training video. The actual configuration shouldn't be so hard to do. What is difficult is to understand what it actually means and understand the larger concept of access control. A last tip that could help is to look at the permission in the content item detail view, where you can enlarge the view to see what it means for the different user roles. And even through Show Advanced, look at it in a matrix shape. Whenever you make changes to the user roles and permissions, do we really recommend to test them out? The best way to do this is to create a test user with another email account you own. With your administrator user, you can then apply different user roles to this test account and log in with your test account in another browser or via an incognito window and test out that what you intend to allow actually works and what you intend to not allow doesn't work. So that's a lot to take in. Don't expect to master this topic from the first time. It won't happen often that you need to make changes to user roles and permissions. And it's then probably handy to rewatch this video to get full understanding. And don't forget that we at Picturepark are happy to advise you on particular use cases. We hope this helps to make the most of your content in Picturepark.